Carter Blake was not the kind of man who blended into the night, he was the kind who turned it upside down. In a single reckless decision, he stole a police cruiser and ignited one of the wildest chases Brookhaven had ever seen, a pursuit that would push a patrol car to 126 miles per hour and drag the entire town into chaos. It was a Wednesday night in Brookhaven, the kind of place where nothing much ever happened after dark. By the time the clock hit midnight, most of the town was asleep. The gas stations had closed, the diners had locked their doors, and the main street looked like a photograph frozen in time. For the few night shift officers on duty, it was supposed to be another uneventful shift, driving the same empty roads they had driven 100 times before. But that night, in the quiet hours when people let their guard down, someone was watching and waiting. Carter Blake had spent weeks drifting around town, never staying in one spot too long. He wasn't known to most people in Brookhaven, but the few who had seen him remembered the sharp look in his eyes, the way he always scanned his surroundings like he was sizing everything up. Carter wasn't reckless in the usual sense. He didn't smash windows for loose change or break into houses without a plan. He believed in finding opportunities where others saw nothing, and on that night he saw something he couldn't resist. Down a side street near the old train depot, a police cruiser sat with its engine still running. The officer who had been driving it had stepped away for only a few minutes, probably thinking no one would dare touch a marked patrol car parked in such a visible place. But Carter was no ordinary thief. To him, this was more than a car, it was a challenge, a test, and maybe even a ticket to something bigger. He knew the risk was enormous, but he also knew that if he pulled it off, people would talk about it for years. That thought alone gave him the push he needed. The engine purred steadily, exhaust drifting in the cold night air. Carter glanced around, checking the corners, the shadows, and the rooftops, making sure no one was watching. His heartbeat quickened, but his hands stayed steady. He slid into the driver's seat, the heavy door closing with a click that echoed louder than he expected. In that moment, he crossed a line he could never walk back from. He gripped the steering wheel, shifted into gear, and pressed down on the accelerator. The cruiser responded instantly, surging forward with more power than any car he'd ever driven. The sound of the tires rolling over the cracked asphalt made his pulse race. He was no longer just a man sneaking around in the dark, he was now behind the wheel of the very vehicle meant to stop people like him. As he sped out of the depot lot, Carter cut the headlights to avoid drawing attention, letting the glow of the dashboard light his way. The sirens were silent, but the car still carried an aura of authority. Anyone who caught even a glimpse of it in the night would assume it was on official business. That thought filled him with a dangerous thrill. He wasn't just stealing a car. He was stealing the symbol of control, the badge on wheels, and using it for himself. Carter believed he had pulled off something daring, something that would leave the entire town talking by morning. But what he didn't realize was that the car he was driving was not like any other vehicle. This was a fully equipped police cruiser, and every system inside it was designed to keep it connected at all times. The second he drove away from the depot, an alert was triggered in the dispatch center. A signal on a computer screen told operators that one of their units was moving where it shouldn't be. And with the officer who had left it unaccounted for, the truth became clear in an instant. Someone had stolen a patrol car. Carter was still gripping the wheel, savoring the feeling of power as the vehicle surged forward. He pressed harder on the accelerator and felt the push of the engine respond smoothly. He had never driven anything so powerful, and the way the car hugged the road gave him the confidence to push faster. His excitement blinded him to the fact that every officer within miles now knew exactly where he was headed. Dispatchers relayed the news across radios, their voices calm but firm. Unit reported stolen, suspect traveling eastbound. Officers who had been idling suddenly came to life, patrol cars roaring to life and scattering in different directions to close off roads and track the stolen cruiser. Carter thought the night was his, but in reality, a net was tightening around him before he even reached the edge of town. He guided the cruiser onto the highway, the streetlights flashing past him in a blur. The speedometer needle climbed quickly, passing 90 and pushing higher. The rush of adrenaline filled his chest, and he laughed under his breath, feeling untouchable. Other drivers on the highway barely noticed at first, assuming it was just another police car racing to an emergency. They pulled aside, clearing the lanes for him, never knowing that it wasn't an officer at the wheel. That illusion worked in his favor for only a short time. Behind him, the first patrol cars began to catch sight of his taillights. Helicopters were called in, rotors thundering through the night sky as searchlights swept over the road. Carter pressed harder, determined not to let them close in. The engine growled, and soon he was weaving recklessly between semi-trucks and late-night commuters, forcing them to swerve and slam their brakes to avoid disaster. Each maneuver put lives at risk, but Carter was too consumed by the thrill to notice or care. Inside the dispatch center, maps lit up with his movements, the GPS ping marking his exact location. Police units converged from different highways, their sirens blaring now, the sound echoing across the sleeping town. What Carter thought would be a quick and clever getaway was already turning into something far bigger than he imagined. The cruiser he had stolen had become a beacon, guiding every law enforcement officer straight to him. And still, he pushed forward, chasing speed like it was the only thing that mattered. The stolen cruiser tore down the highway, its engine roaring louder with every push of the accelerator. Carter leaned forward, eyes locked on the road as though focus alone could carry him beyond the reach of the law. His hands were steady, but his mind raced as quickly as the car itself. Behind him, red and blue lights began to glow in the distance, multiplying with each passing minute. What started as a single patrol car in pursuit was quickly turning into an army of flashing beacons chasing through the night. The helicopters arrived soon after. Their spotlights sliced through the darkness, sweeping across fields and roads until finally locking onto the stolen cruiser. Carter gritted his teeth. He knew that as long as that light followed him, he had no place to hide. Instead of slowing down, he pressed harder on the pedal, the speedometer climbing past 100 and climbing still. His heart pounded as the car shook under the strain, the tires screeching against the asphalt when he swerved between lanes. Other drivers on the highway panicked at the sight. Some braked suddenly, while others swerved out of the way, not realizing they were dodging a man fleeing from the very police who should have been driving that car. Each second brought fresh danger, but Carter was chasing more than escape. He was chasing the feeling of control. For the first time, he felt like he held the upper hand against the entire system. That rush blinded him to the risks he was creating for himself and for everyone else around him. Police officers stayed close but careful, wary of pushing the chase too hard and causing a crash. They coordinated through radios, attempting to box him in, but Carter was unpredictable. When they tried to force him toward the shoulder, he darted into another lane, nearly clipping the side of a truck. When they prepared spike strips further down the highway, he suddenly veered off onto an exit ramp, the cruiser fishtailing before regaining balance on the narrower road. Dust rose behind him as he darted onto a rural path, leaving the smooth highway behind for cracked pavement and sharp turns. For a few moments, Carter believed he had outsmarted them. The helicopters struggled to track him as he sped under tree cover, and the patrol cars lagged behind on the tighter roads. The cruiser jolted over uneven ground, headlights bouncing wildly with every dip and bump. The speedometer still pushed past 100, but Carter didn't let up. He told himself that the faster he went, the less chance they had to catch him. But the car wasn't invincible, and every reckless maneuver only pushed it closer to the breaking point. The chase had turned into a dangerous game of survival, and Carter was willing to play it at full speed. He was now racing not only against the police behind him, but against time, the car, and fate itself. Carter's gamble on the rural backroads seemed to pay off at first, but the very vehicle that gave him power was also his downfall. The cruiser wasn't built for endless punishment at high speeds over rough terrain. The constant strain pushed the engine beyond its limits. The first sign of trouble came as a faint clattering beneath the hood, a sound so subtle Carter almost ignored it. Minutes later, it grew louder, rattling with every turn of the wheels. He pressed the gas harder, hoping to outrun the noise, but instead the car began coughing, spurts of smoke drifting from the edges of the hood. The officers still following at a distance noticed it immediately. The car was wearing down, its once flawless acceleration faltering. The helicopters above stayed fixed on him, circling like predators waiting for their prey to weaken. Carter clenched his jaw, refusing to accept what was happening. He swerved off the cracked road onto a field, dirt sprang up behind him, but the cruiser struggled to keep momentum. The more he forced it, the worse the engine responded. Then came a sharp pop, followed by a plume of white smoke. Carter cursed under his breath as he fought the steering wheel, the car jerking violently before settling again. The once mighty machine was now groaning like an animal pushed too far. He could still move, but not at the reckless speed that had carried him so far. His hands tightened around the wheel, and in that slowing moment, the weight of reality began to set in. The car that had made him feel untouchable was starting to betray him. When officers finally closed the gap, they prepared for the chase to end, but what they discovered after surrounding the slowing vehicle took them by surprise. Once Carter was forced to stop, they later searched the cruiser and uncovered something alarming in the trunk. Locked inside was a stash of police-issued equipment gear that had been reported missing weeks earlier from different departments. The stolen car was more than just an impulsive joyride. It was a tool that tied Carter to other unsolved thefts, suggesting he had been planning more than anyone had realized. The revelation changed the tone of the pursuit. This wasn't simply about recovering a vehicle anymore. It was about stopping someone who had been building towards something bigger. Investigators whispered to one another about the possibility of a larger scheme. Had Carter been planning to use the stolen gear for another crime? Had he taken the cruiser as part of a calculated plan, not just a reckless decision? The discovery left everyone unsettled. Meanwhile, Carter sat inside the failing car, chest heaving as the engine hissed and smoked around him. His desperate attempts to push forward were no longer enough. The thrill that had carried him through the night began to fade, replaced by the creeping certainty that he was running out of time and running out of road. The field outside town was soaked from recent rain, and the soft ground dragged at the cruiser's tires as Carter tried to keep moving. The engine coughed, sputtered, and finally gave out with a long hiss of steam rising into the night. The headlights dimmed, then flickered off, leaving him in darkness broken only by the sweep of helicopter beams and the strobe of squad car lights closing in. Carter gripped the wheel, his knuckles pale, as if sheer willpower could bring the dead machine back to life. But it was over. The car that had carried him to 126 miles per hour now sat silent, useless, and surrounded. He shoved the door open and stumbled into the wet grass, shoes sinking into the mud. For a moment, he considered hiding in the shadows of the field, but the glare of searchlights erased any chance of disappearing. Sirens grew louder, engines roared closer, and within seconds the calm countryside was transformed into a scene of chaos. Dozens of officers rushed toward him, their voices echoing commands he no longer had the strength or time to defy. Yet Carter wasn't ready to surrender. He ran. The mud sucked at his legs with every stride, slowing him to a clumsy sprint. His breath tore through his chest, and the weight of exhaustion pressed down like a stone. For a man who had flown across highways at breathtaking speed, his final escape attempt was painfully slow. Officers gained ground with ease, their flashlights bouncing across the field, cutting through the mist that clung to the grass. He slipped once, scrambled back up, and kept running, but the chase on foot was short-lived. The end came abruptly. A heavy tackle sent Carter crashing into the mud, face first, his body pinned beneath the force of two officers. Cold steel cuffs locked around his wrists, and the fight was drained from him. He lay still, chest heaving, his face streaked with dirt, rain, and sweat. The night that had started with reckless confidence and a stolen cruiser now ended with Carter restrained, surrounded, and utterly defeated. When officers searched him and the vehicle more thoroughly, the pieces of the puzzle became clearer. The stash of stolen gear in the trunk tied him to thefts that had baffled nearby towns for weeks. Radios, body armor, and tactical equipment were all there, hidden away as if waiting for a bigger plan. The truth of his intentions remained unclear, but one fact was undeniable. His actions had nearly cost lives, both his and countless others caught on the roads he tore across. As he was led away, floodlights still glaring across the soaked field, the adrenaline finally left his body, replaced by a hollow weight he couldn't shake. The man who thought he could humiliate the law by driving their own car against them was now a spectacle, his capture witnessed by more officers than he could count. The chase was over, but the consequences were just beginning. What had started as a reckless gamble would now follow him for years, etched into the town's memory as the night a thief believed he could outrun everyone and lost.